Hello and welcome back, everyone. Happy Thursday. The first Happy Thursday in quite some time, which is going to be Dev Diary number 142, which is a little bit of a retrospective of 2024. So for those of you who are hoping to see something that would be upcoming in 1.9, this is not going to be the Dev Diary for you. It's just entirely a retrospective. But it is, of course, a Happy Thursday, a great Thursday, because we have a Dev Diary. Although a little bit of bad news at the end there. Let's get into it. Happy Thursday, and welcome to the brand new year. Of course, we are greeted as the first Thursday with a Happy Thursday. It is indeed a Happy New Year, but more importantly, a Happy Thursday. I hope you've all had a nice holiday and a good start to 2025. Indeed, we have. As I mentioned in the last Dev Diary, this one is going to be a brief retrospective on the year that's passed and the updates and DLC that were released in that year. I'll share my thoughts on what I think we did well and where we can improve moving forward. I will go over each of the major releases in turn, followed by a summary of my overall thoughts for the whole year. So, as one might expect, a retrospective of sort. Our first release of 2024 was Update 1.6, which was kind of a bit of well, we'll get into it, but it was a bit of a bridge patch. Not a whole lot in 1.6. They changed migration, and they made the game slower, even though it was supposed to be faster, but he's going to talk about that in March, and I consider it to be our low point of the year. Yep. Well, the update itself contained a lot of nice improvements. It was released in pretty rough shape. It did require a couple hotfixes, and contrary to our expectations at the time, had worse overall performance for the majority of users. This was kind of a low point in terms of optimism for me, because every single patch up until then had made performance worse, and then they were like, 1.6 is going to be the performance patch, and then it bricked performance as well. Not super hard, but it made me just very pessimistic for the prospect of any performance improvement, and then bam, 1.7 really crushed performance in a good way. This felt, in all honesty, more than a little embarrassing to me, since I had stated improved performance to be one of our goals with the update. Yeah. The reason this happened is simply that even though we had made a plethora, there's that word plethora, of performance improvements, other changes, principally AI improvements and changes to migration, degraded performance more than these improvements could make up for. What this made us realize is that our internal tools for monitoring performance were simply inadequate to the task, and our tech lead spent a considerable amount of time expanding and improving on something we'll call the performance dashboard. Now, this for me is quite fascinating. This is something that's like really a peek inside kind of internally how they're doing stuff, to the extent that this is not the performance dashboard. This is not a forward-facing thing that a dev would often talk about, because this isn't something we interact with at all, but as an internal tool for them, if it's something that, I mean, we're not going to even hear that much, that allows them to improve performance or to better monitor it, this is fantastic, and we have in 1.7 and 1.8 seen improved performance after a long string of zero performance improvements, which of course is something that I think is really important, because just about a lot of improvements that I would like to see to the game involve utilizing more performance, and so if you can't kind of increase performance in some ways, you won't be able to sacrifice performance, to those new features and this sort of thing, which now monitors overall performance, but also provides a plethora, there's the word again, of useful breakdowns. As an example of new functionality added to the dashboard, the new tools contain a heat map of the most performance-intensive parts of the game, which is fantastic, such as updating pop trade growth and adjusting trade volumes. So this is part of why I think trade currently is really bad. It got really bad. It was really good before patch 1.5. Mappy significantly nerfed it, and also there had been several nerfs over the course of several patches to the number of convoys you received, such that you can't really run anywhere near as many trade routes if you don't have access to as many convoys. Convoys are now really expensive, and so you don't see really much trade or effective trade. And I had kind of felt for some time that one of the reasons why they had made these changes was that if you decrease trade volume, you don't have to worry about the performance sink as much. So with a 2-week history that lets us know immediately, spot a change in a particular part of the game causes it to become slower so that we can make an immediate action. So this is a monitoring tool for them that lets them know if a specific change in game is causing a problem. All of this, alongside some extra allocation of programming resources, allowed us to release both updates 1.7 and 1.8. As always, on average, individual hardware variation issues unfortunately mean performance improvements are never going to be universal, with significant performance improvements despite all the new features those updates introduced. And 1.7 was a huge shocker. 1.7 improved performance an enormous amount. 1.8 just a little bit, more specifically in the late game, but it was still an improvement. In addition to the performance monitoring, the performance dashboard also tracks more specific data, such as the slowest events, which lets us quickly spot when suboptimally written triggers start to impact overall performance. Kind of an interesting point. A lot of the more developer side stuff or programming side stuff is going to be like, the nuance of it's probably going to be lost on me to some extent. It's worth noting that something being green being yellow or red isn't inherently bad. It's okay for a complex event to use up more computing power, so long as it adds to it all adds up to a reasonable level. So all of this combined, and we kind of, if we see here, we can see just exactly how much, I guess, units of performance are being pulled, in order to allocate for this. We see Indian nationalism is a pretty heavy cost here relative to the other events. I don't know to what extent events are going to be like a driver of performance drag, but it's really interesting to see that it's an internal tool that apparently has allowed them to do a lot better in 1.7 and 1.8. However, I'm getting a little ahead of myself now. No, it's fine. It's good. We like hearing the off-topic, like how this is working internally. Returning the update 1.6, of course, wasn't all that bad. On the good side, the update ended up being the UX update, and it contained a lot of UX improvements ranging from simple quality of life to more significant changes such as the formation map marker consolidation and the addition of proper migration map mode. I think this also included the migration change. The most significant and well-received UX feature was probably the pop census panel. We don't really use that much. It's not that important to us, and by us I mean me. I think it's probably important to some people, but it's not too good, which allows you to, it's great in terms of that it works and does exactly like kind of what you want to do. We just don't consult it very often. It allows you to truly get into the nitty-gritty details of your population. To be fair, when we want to look up some stuff, we do use it. The trains bonus pack, hell yeah, brother. We released alongside 1.6 also merits a mention, as honestly, who doesn't like free trains? Nobody doesn't like free trains. Really would love another free train pack along with a train video. We'll see. If 1.6 was our low point of 2024, then update 1.7 and Sphere of Influence, released in June, was definitely a high point. Both the expansion and the update itself performed extremely well, were positively received by the community, and there was an enormous bump in overall play count during this time period, like really, really, really big. In particular, I want to mention the building ownership rework, that is the separation of the financial districts and manor houses, a massive month-long effort to create a more complex relationship between buildings, pops, and countries, which allowed for foreign investment. There was some internal debate about whether we should really spend so much of our available development time overhauling the economic core of the game for a diplomacy-oriented expansion, but in doing so is what allowed us to implement foreign investment. I definitely like the change as a natural extension of building, construction, and autonomous investment systems instead of making it a tacked-on mechanic, and I consider it to be well worth the time spent. I think I do too. So the thing is like, anytime you do, I really like the change, but anytime you do anything, it's like opportunity cost, right? And in terms of prioritization, I think that the wider Victoria 3 community kind of really only wants one thing relative to everything else. And this is my opinion, and that is improvements in the military system. This is the wider Victoria 3 community. I personally want the diplomatic play to be improved more than anything else. And so while I really do like the new ownership system, I would have preferred an improvement to the diplomatic play. Although I think that kind of, if you're going to capture the essence of the Victorian era in terms of a theme, I think one theme that's very important is the nature of extractive colonialization and extracting value from other powers and colonized nations and these types of things. And this is something that I think definitely, if you are trying to abstract properly in terms of a theme, you need ownership to be not locally where the buildings are, which is to say you need the ownership of the opium plantations. You need that to be contained back in London. So I do think it's a necessary feature. I just probably would have sequenced the improvements of various features a little bit differently than necessarily going for foreign ownership first. Power blocks is another interesting 1.7 sphere of influence addition to mention in relation to its community reception. During the initial conception, power blocks were intended to be a broader feature that could capture a variety of, criminals, as one does when they are, the loud cops outside. Of course, what you need to be capturing is the criminals, which is why you're loud and why you're outside, because the criminals aren't in here, at least not yet. Child labor, shout out to that. A variety of transactional or transnational agreements. But in actual implementation, it suffered from the approach of trying to do a little bit of everything, and it ended up being quite underwhelming. Following feedback from QA and beta testers, we refocused the feature into one focusing almost entirely on imperialist projects. The decision is something that we received some criticism and pushback about in the Power Block dev diaries, as some of the community felt the features were now too narrowly focused. I don't really remember the exact rollout of the power blocks, or like the feedback on the power blocks relative to the actual early access version of the power blocks, and so it's a little bit difficult for me to comment on this. Though I know at least a few people who came around to it after the update was ultimately released. I do know that there was a block that gave 5% mappy, and that was removed. Very strong modifier. Ultimately, I believe we made the right call, as I'd rather we add features which does a few things, but does them well, rather than one which stretches itself thin and just ends up being underwhelming. Something that was a bore on the mixed side of things was the great game objective. I would probably generally agree with his evaluation here. Well, the objective itself seemed pretty well received, and we saw a noticeable increase in the number of playthroughs of the countries involved with it. There was, and still is, the perception that playing without the great game objective locks you out of content added for those countries. Doesn't it still lock you out of the ticker/struggle progress bar between the UK and Russia? I suppose the fact that I don't know this for certain is emblematic of the fact that this is a little bit ambiguous, at least to the player. I can only attribute this to poor communication on our part, and that we need to clarify, more clearly indicate exactly how objectives change the experience, and the fact that they do not lock away country-specific JEs when not enabled. But I do think the overall power struggle bar does get locked. I guess I don't... Okay, the last thing I want to mention for 1.7 is that the AI, and this is actually something that's really, I think, an absolutely huge thing, and it's a thing that's not, there's no, like, bells and whistles on it, so it's a lot harder, or it's a lot easier to forget how significant an update this was. This is, I think, probably, for the purposes of gameplay, this might actually be more important than the ownership rework or power blocks, and that was AI was significantly improved, especially on the diplomatic side. The introduction of catalysts. The catalyst system and the way it explicitly informs you when and why AI changes their diplomatic stance towards you is something I'm personally very happy with. Me too, because before they would sometimes randomly just spaz out and hate you, and there was never a reason for doing this, and now it's going to be the result of a catalyst. And as a model for how I want to continue to improve Victoria 3 AI going forward, I want the AI of Victoria 3 to be both an interesting opponent and an interesting ally, self-interested but largely rational, rather than just, like, psychotically sometimes rolling the 1 out of 100 when it decides to spaz out and turn on you for no reason. And for the players to understand why it makes the decisions it makes, even if it's not the decision the players themselves would make. This is an approach which necessitates the kind of transparency offered by the Catalyst system, as opposed to the opaque black box of hidden dice rolls that preceded it. Really frustrating and psychotic AI before, much more transparent now. We, of course, have a lot of work to do here, and improving the AI isn't something that we're ever going to really be finished with, so the main takeaway here is that we don't want to just make the AI smarter or better at challenging the player, we also want to make it make more sense. which I think is really what Diplomatic Catalyst managed to do. It's specifically removing a lot of pie thumbing and spazzing out that was nonsensical. There was a little bit of transparency added in 1.6 in terms of the diplomatic play, which was extraordinarily frustrating. This doesn't get mentioned in kind of the analysis here, but the little system where you can see just how close they are to siding with you or against you, I think was also a huge improvement for making the diplomatic system seem, as they put it, a little less black boxy. Finally, we've reached 1.8, which I actually think... I'm on the fence whether 1.8 or 1.7 is my favorite update. I think 1.5 is kind of ineligible because they introduced a really annoying bug and then they didn't fix it for like 4 months. Otherwise, 1.5 might be in the discussion there. But I think 1.8 introduced... I really liked the kind of rework of... the way, or not rework, but cultural movements, I think are just absolutely tremendous, and also making pops care about race and making racism and overall acceptance a little bit more of a grayscale rather than black and white, I think is just a massive improvement, but it's also a subtle one. And 1.8, I think, wasn't very well received overall. And I think that, generally speaking, people weren't very happy with it. If you look at the Steam charts in terms of playership, the bump for 1.8 was incredibly small. To be fair, it wasn't a full DLC. Pivot of Empire was a flavor pack, not a full DLC, so it's not going to be as big as 1.7. But still, I think that it was underwhelming to a lot of people, and they were kind of a little bit disappointed, and that is kind of my overall impression. And last time, Wiz talked about this, because this is Wiz writing it, unless I'm grossly mistaken. It is Wiz. He said that there was a lot of positive feedback, and I was thinking back on that. I looked back over that when we did our end of the year kind of reading through some of our dev diaries, and I think overall the reception for 1.8 was negative, even though it was one of my favorites. The final release for 2024, as I posted in a recent dev diary on my thoughts on this specific update, so I won't go into too much detail because he just talked about it. But I do want to mention that we have taken a further look at the balance of India content, particularly the unstable Raj JE, which we looked at the telemetry for completion rates across the pair place and found significantly lower than intended, and concluded that some of the further balancing is needed for us at 1.9. It was kind of hard, I think, early on. Specifically, we want to adjust the difficulty level while improving the rewards for completing it successfully, but also look into making failing the JE less of a game-ruining state. Specifically, I think you just didn't want to fail, but you didn't mind the JE timing out, if I remember the event correctly. But yeah, the reward was something like a nothing burger, and like you start to see more and more of these things kind of crop up with them. This uncomfortable tension between Victoria 3 development team wanting the game to be as sandboxy as possible because they think that it's problematic to give individual modifiers to individual countries, and they don't want to project particular playstyles as emerging for particular bonuses. You need to reconcile that with the fact that one of the ways if you just reward players with narrative content, that won't be satisfying to a very large section of players, and they want rewards to feel good. If rewards are going to feel good, they have to be a reward or some kind of bonus, which will create this differentiation that they want to avoid in terms of the sandbox paradigm. And so they're in a bit of a weird spot where it's difficult to create flavor without creating asymmetry between nations, which is something they have historically wanted to avoid. And I don't know what the resolution is to this. I personally prefer a more heavy hand with flavor and a little bit less on the sandbox, especially now since I have so many hours in the game. But this is something we've talked about, and I think something that is probably an internal struggle to some extent for the Victoria 3 dev team, which is that you get pulled in two different directions simultaneously, wanting to adhere to both flavor and also wanting to adhere to rewarding players for these types of things. And I think there's potentially systems that you could run that would allow the game to be sandboxy and also allow for rewards. But we see a lot of smaller countries get really, really insane bonuses. Like, I think Persia can get, like, 10% throughput on manufacturing for, like, 10 years or something, or 20 years, which is functionally a fifth of the game, so that's really a lot. I think Afghanistan gets a permanent government investment pool or government dividends contribution efficiency modifier of 5%, making them theoretically the best for a command economy. But now we're introducing differentiation between nations, and so it is a little bit of a difficult thing. I think we've rambled about this before, so let's not continue on with it too much. I want to reiterate that one of the major learnings we made from 1.8/Pivot of Empire is the need to focus more on the why of journal entries rather than designing them when designing them in the future. That is, why do you pursue and complete the journal entry? What player fantasy is it fulfilling? What playstyle is it supporting? And what rewards does it offer? And to communicate those to the player. A lot of times, there's no communication of what you get as a reward for completing a journal entry. It's very unsatisfying when you do something. It feels incredibly difficult, which I think the Unstable Raj is the event I'm thinking of. You do it, it feels very difficult, and then it gives you basically nothing. And then we get the that's it. When presented, the reaction to the player when completing a complex journal entry should never be, that's it, when presented with the conclusion and rewards, which is definitely the experience I had when, reloading to redo some stuff for the British Raj kind of events. Sorry, a lot of talking today. A little parched, voice is kind of going. On a more positive note, something that we expected to be positively received, but which turned out extremely well, was the State Hub renaming. This isn't something I care too much about, because I never do this type of thing, but it's now something I'm terrified of in multiplayer in terms of, the prospect of hosting a game. I don't want someone, naming something really, inappropriate to a display on stream and me just never noticing that the name has been changed. So I almost wish this wasn't in the game, but we are already planning to continuously add more renaming functionality to the game, and a massive amount of positive feedback we've gotten has only strengthened that ambition. So I thought that this one was a little bit of an interesting one. It's not that it doesn't make sense, it's just it doesn't quite apply to me. Lastly, in regards to 1.8/Pivot of Empire, I want to mention something that came as a bit of a surprise to us. It's the strong negative feedback reaction to the lack of an expansion pass or for Pivot of Empire. Again, this is something we've talked about, but I do want to mention that there will absolutely be more expansion passes going forward. The reason we didn't do so already is that we found expansion passes work best for us in terms of being able to plan and deliver high quality releases when they start off with a major expansion rather than ending with one, so that's what we'll be doing going forward. They haven't really said if 1.9 is going to be a full-on DLC or yet not, but to conclude the dev diary, and here's the little bit of bad news. This is the bad news. To conclude the dev diary, I want to share a bit of an internal phrase that's been going around. 24 is the year that Victoria 3 hit its stride. I think I said on stream a while ago that we were kind of entering the lowest numbers ever for Victoria 3, and then because I looked at the numbers and that's what it looked like, but I must have just misread the numbers. If you compare the numbers 2023 to 2024 for just about every single month, barring release months where a patch released and there was not a symmetrical patch release on the year previous, 2024 just pretty much beats 2023. Although in terms of evaluating 2024 as an entire year, December of 2024 and I suppose January of 2025 are kind of the lowest performing in terms of the Steam numbers that we've seen, and 1.8 specifically I think is the smallest patch bump we've ever seen out of a patch that had an accompanying flavor pack or DLC in terms of the playership bump, which is something I keep track of because as in terms of making content, the correlation between the number of people playing and the amount of views and stuff I get on videos is extremely strong. So right now is kind of the lowest it's been in several months, but it's no secret that the game had its issues on launch, and we've made mistakes in the initial post-release period, but from update 1.5 onwards, particularly after 1.7 Sphere of Influence, we've seen excellent player base growth and greatly improved community sentiment. I just want to say that 1.7 and 1.8 were very clean rollouts relative to 1.6, 1.5, 1.4, 1.3, 1.2, 1.1, and 1.0. They definitely have been a lot cleaner. 1.5 featured a construction bug that I hated so much, and it was layered on top of a bunch of stuff I really enjoyed, but the patch, the public beta patch for 1.5 that preceded the release version of 1.5, I thought was actually just way better than the release version of 1.5 that we stayed on. Even after it got hotfixed a couple times, I still would have rather played like the beta patch over that, just as a general sense. So I thought, even though 1.5 introduced a lot of stuff that I liked and I thought was interesting in this type of thing, I thought the actual like rollout of the patch was not particularly clean. And I think that 1.8 specifically might be the cleanest rollout of all the patches. I mean, there were some problems, but overall it was extremely smooth. And so I also think that 1.8 is going to... I think the political movements, that there's kind of a lot going on underneath the surface with them, and a lot of subtlety, much like, in terms of, like, actually improving the game, I think the discrimination and political movements, like, differentiation is super important. I think that 1.7's AI change was super important, and I think that in terms of improving the game, that these are some of the biggest improvements of the year, more so than the kind of relatively flashy power block type stuff, and so, I do think that this is one of the reasons why I think that 1.8 is like one of the stronger patches, even though it wasn't really well received, I think. Let's see. Let's continue. 2024 is a very good year for Victoria 3, certainly relative to 2023, and I'm very excited to continue building on the successes, to add depth, flavor, and excessively? Is that the word we want to use here? I feel like is this supposed to be extensively in-depth socioeconomic simulation mechanics to this very special game series, quite like anything else I've worked on, not the we, but the Wiz we or the Wiz I. I think that right now we're kind of at perhaps a little bit of a low point in terms of the player base, though, at least relative to the rest of the year preceding it, mainly because I think that 1.5 or 1.8 didn't hit as hard as 1.5 or 1.7 did, whereas 1.5 I think came out in fall of not this last fall, but I guess fall of 2023. There was a pretty big bump from that. But that's all for today. With the update 1.9 some time away, we're now going to take a bit of an extended break to focus. They just got off a break to focus solely on the development side of things. Expect us to return sometime in the early spring with details on the trade rework, frontline improvements, and so much more. Which, of course, this is what people want to see more than anything else. You ask what people want to see, they say three things. They say there's three things that they want to see. They want to see the military get fixed. They also want to see the military get fixed. And finally, but most importantly, they want to see the military get fixed. I've made this joke before, but like really, that is what people kind of comment on most. So it is exciting to see them do that. I personally am probably more excited about the trade rework, because I really do think that it making the economics a little bit more interesting is more entertaining to me. But we'll see those kind of what they're going to be cooking up in regards to these two things in early spring, and that means we probably won't be getting Happy Thursdays until then. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. You know, do the YouTube algorithm thing. And other than that, have a happy, I said happy Wednesday. Have a happy Thursday, and many happy Thursdays come if we don't see you for several happy Thursdays, as they are.